Hello and welcome to another episode of ClueCon Weekly. I am your host, John Gray, and today I'm honored to introduce our guest, Daniel Kaplan. DK is not only a good friend of mine, but also has a very strong background in AI. He is a fractional product marketing leader and works a little bit with SignalWire on the ground in order to kind of do some market research and see what the landscape of AI is like. So I'm really excited for this conversation so we can see how it is that AI is kind of impacting not only the landscape of the tech world, but also how it applies specifically to telecom. So DK, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, John. It's great to see you again.
Likewise. So, one of the first talking points I kind of want to dig into is everyone kind of tags AI into their product. We see that across all different landscapes. AI this, AI that. With what you have kind of seen in contact centers specifically, or maybe just larger business opportunities, are companies really adding a lot of value to what they are doing, or do you think they're kind of just slapping an LLM on something and then calling it AI and trying to give the perception of being, advanced and being at the front of the line of, this great trend that we have in technology?
I'll be fully honest. I'm still. I don't want to make really bold claims about AI in the contact center because I'm still at the intermediate level of understanding right now. But my sense of it is that even AI, the word AI is so fuzzy, you know, because you
Hmm.
got predictive
Exactly.
AI and conversational AI and generative AI. And are those things different? In some cases they are, in some cases they're not. It's really, really complex. Conversational AI existed before generative AI, but now they're blurring together. Predictive AI was a completely different thing that generative AI may overlap with to some extent, may not. They may exist in independent ways, they may overlap. And in
Hmm.
the context center, kind of all those things were being used, um, or conversational AI, predictive AI, and now we're seeing generative AI applied to conversational AI across chat. Now we're starting to see voice. It wouldn't surprise me if in the next year to two we start seeing more video. Um, SMS is obviously an open door there as well, or text messaging in general. Um,
Hmm.
we see, and so there's this. Yeah, so that's where I'd say things are starting now. Um,
Hmm.
I'll stop there.
No problem. No, you bring up a good point of, including a lot of different parts of AI and especially in communications, which a lot of our audience kind of entails. But I'm curious, when we are kind of blending due to the trends of AI, what's like a specific customer experience or maybe a telecom product or even just a tech product that you feel like you're really excited about in the future? And how do you feel as though these systems kind of talking together kind of expedites that process? Is there something like a use case specifically that you're kind of passionate about, or that you've seen AI when it's in the works, you get that light bulb eureka moment? What kind of fuels your fire in terms of that?
I mean, specifically in the you're asking specifically about the context center case, or just like AI as it applied AI in the business context, or
I
both?
guess a little bit of both. Yeah, I want to pick your brain on everything.
Sure. So I can talk first about. We'll come back to the contact center things. I think that, or telephony in general, because I think that is pretty central to the Signal Wire story. But what really
Hmm.
blew my mind, using ChatGPT, I think for anybody who ever used it was like the first time they used it was like this is a different thing. Um, but then it was, and it's still ChatGPT, Claude, those are still go-to tools. But where it started getting really interesting and in some sense really disconcerting, and those the fascination slash terror, I think anybody who really pays attention to the forefront of AI could probably relate to some degree of, whoa, this is changing so quickly. We don't really know what this is. How disruptive is this going to be, and how quickly is a central question. But when I started
Hmm.
using AI inside of semi-scripted workflows, there's a tool called Gumloop, and it plays in the space with Zapier and Make and NNN. But they've really done something. They've implemented it in a really sophisticated and thoughtful way that almost makes it like a visual programming language rather than a workflow builder. And as I
Hmm.
started doing that, I started to realize that if you could document a process step by step, and there's a lot of companies, in fact, there's whole businesses that make Loom like videos or screen caps to help people understand how to replicate what they do day to day and train other people on it. And it's a step by step. these are called standard operating procedures in some contexts, and they're step-by-step guides on how to do sometimes fairly complex mid-level staff, knowledge work. And it became pretty clear after I started using Gumloop that that entire category of work was fully automatable. Um,
Hmm.
and so, as someone who is in product marketing and spend my early career doing things like competitive research, battle cards, um, content production around slide decks, all this stuff, seeing that stuff that people were getting in the United States, and I'll speak to that, getting paid six-figure salaries and at mid-level careers, that kind of work seemed to me at that moment, even with the models like 4.40 and Claude 3.5, you could see how
Hmm.
fast they were evolving. And what needed humans in the loop at one point was eventually not going to need humans in the loop. And the issue was the model's capability, expense, and humans' willingness to surrender that work to something they don't control.
Definitely. Yeah, and that brings up a point that I wanted to pick your brain on, in that AI seems to give people a lot of false confidence, where anyone can kind of do this kind of work. Things that would take 10 years, you can now do in 10 seconds. And I think you touched a little bit on some of the, high level, a CEO can now not have to pay a six-figure salary for someone like that. But what kind of false confidence do you feel as though this kind of gives to the end goal? And I know there's a topic right now on vibe coding is really popular, where people will just throw out a vibe to ChatGPT and say, "All right, now I want you to give me like a step by step process on how this is." So not only in specific programmers, but in terms of making content like product marketing and such, where do you feel like the landscape is kind of changing? Do you feel as though overall you're happy and excited about it? Do you feel as though these tools are kind of taking jobs, and do you feel as though the end goal is really the same whether you are using these tools or you're not? You know,
You're touching on very deep questions that
uh-huh.
I would consider myself arrogant if I tried to make a firm answer about. Like vibe coding, I haven't done much of. But the sense I get of it is people who don't have a coding background are able to build to some extent today the apps that they've had in their head. And people with a modest coding background can deliver output, maybe not at the quality and sophistication, and most importantly, robustness when it comes to scalability and security, but at least the interface and the interaction. And
Mhm.
it's not just a clickable prototype. It's actually a working software product in days, hours in some cases. And now, this is a different story when you're talking about enterprise scale apps with complex dependencies. I'm not a software developer, so I don't want to speak too strongly on that. But even things like product marketing, you saw vibe marketing and vibe content
Mhm.
production. And these things are a lot about taste. And this is a whole category of like, how do people evaluate what models are? And they call it vibes, right? It's like,
Yep.
does Claude's new model, does the copy that it produces feel higher quality than or more human than the quality of the copy that ChatGPT produces? And these are
Mhm.
incredibly subjective measurements, but there's something to it. How do you measure taste? How do you quantify it? These are not subjective experiences, not simple to quantify. It's maybe not possible.
Exactly.
So, but the expertise question, these are open questions. Like right now, it's probable, and we're seeing examples of this, that people who have no background in infrastructure engineering that make apps and they try to bring them into production and hit scale problems or or certainly security problems. People are seeing that happen where they launch something, it looks really cool, and then someone's like, "Oh, this is a vulnerability." They hack it and it blows up. Um,
Mhm.
how much is that just the current state of the art, and how much more of the fully robust, complex apps will fully autonomous AI agents be able to create? I think the sky is kind of the limit over a a horizon of time that could be 1 to 10 years. Um, if I
Mhm.
was in the conventional SaaS business, where I had a software product with an interface and a classic database on the back end, and it wasn't incredibly differentiated, like some other company could replicate it in a year or two of work, I would be extremely nervous, because it would be possible to have a video screen cap of all of the major interactions. and have an AI replicate it. And it doesn't need to scale to 1 million users. It just needs to scale to your team. And that's, I think that's inevitable. That kind of thing. The
Yeah.
time frame for when it's really production grade is an open question, but it's not long.
No, definitely. And you kind of touch on a point of perception is a bit of reality when it comes to these things. And when you're saying, I can kick out this, so and so deliverable in a matter of time, but it looks really good. And, GPT has, or, really any of these LLMs, they have a really good way of taking our jumbled words and feeding it into bite-sized chunks that we can actually interpret. Like they structure it well so that we can kind of get that facade and we get that impression. On impressions, AI is pretty difficult in order to the barrier to entry for the user is sometimes a little bit tricky. People don't like talking to bots. They think, oh, this is a robot, it can't solve my problem. And one thing that Tony, our CEO, said was AI is like a mirror. And I think that works both ways for the customer experience as well as some of the ways and tools that you use for it. By that, if you don't know what you're doing and you don't know how to properly define what inputs, outputs, and the way that you go about it, it's going to fall back and it's going to look like it's going to be a disaster at the end of the day. On the user experience side, I find that I built something really cool and then I go to show like my grandma and then she asks it a really niche question about, her old car from 1950. And I'm like, Grandma, this is a bot for refilling your prescription. It's not supposed to know all this stuff. So how in kind of product marketing or customer experience do we make these systems so that they are the most efficient so that we aren't idiots looking into mirrors? We are setting ourselves up for kind of success. And I guess if that isn't enough of a conversation starter, then where do we have the best impact so that we can save face for brand but also have a pleasant experience for customers?
No, so again, this is one of those areas where I will not pretend to be an expert and have profound insight, but I will say that first, the AI mirror thing. I think there are many, many, many layers to which that is true. I don't want to go too far
Hmm.
down that rabbit hole, but I'm an active meditator. I've been meditating pretty regularly for about 10 years. I do esoteric forms of yoga. In the short, and this is not to brag, it's just to say that I spent a lot of time observing my own thoughts and the
Definitely.
mental processes that my mind appears to generate. And when I look at the way AI generate tokens, I'm like, where and the way it responds to prompts and the way it can follow a rabbit hole once the rabbit hole starts going. I
Hmm.
notice those own patterns from a distance when I watch my own mind, when I'm stressed about something, when something in a relationship is challenging or something at work is challenging. The kinds of thoughts my mind generates and then the loops that it starts following, when I'm able to get distance from it. If you look at what happens with the generative AI when you give it a certain prompt and you start following it down a certain direction, it is very similar to the point
Hmm.
of being sometimes existentially very confusing to witness what looks like a mind. And this is a hugely controversial topic. I don't want to get too far into the question. This is conscious. What is this? What is a mind? Those are outside of scope. But the mirror thing is huge.
Yeah.
From a practical perspective, it is a mirror. The degree to which you are able to articulate your intentions clearly in writing or verbally, as AI gets more voice activated, will be reflected back to you in the quality of the outputs. Now, every model vendor has a large incentive to be able to translate less articulate requests into ideal prompts behind the scenes and then generate what the user wants so people don't get frustrated. But the question you asked is a really deep one. If you're a company, do you want an artificial general intelligence checking package notification, checking the status of a package? Is
Hmm.
that really the use of compute that makes sense? How much of that these you know this these but you also want it to stay on task. You don't want it to become the person's therapy. You don't want a person to go to CVS to check their pharmacy status and then get into a therapeutic conversation. Sorry, their prescription status, and then get into a
Exactly.
therapeutic conversation with their AI. You, businesses specifically, partially because these things are very, very expensive to run right now.
Hmm.
Again, the prices are likely to continue to go down, but it's still the case that that's not a great outcome for a business, even if a human might want to use, say, a retailer's chatbot that way.
No, and I think you hit on a point that actually hit home pretty hard when you were mentioning the prescription because we actually I worked on a project where we were helping out a doctor's office, and this was maybe a year plus ago, and AI in conversational regards was not very well adopted, so people were using it like it was a game. The first couple logs, as we're digging through to make sure that it's not hallucinating or anything, people would be like, tell me a joke, tell me a story. And I'm like, dude, you called to schedule an appointment with your doctor. You're sick right now. Why are you focusing on asking this AI a joke? So I think that making product specific and setting intent, as you kind of talk about holistically, from the prompt to as well as how you tell the user that they want to interact, setting intentions is extremely valuable. And I find myself in the same pitfall that you mentioned where uh, you will sometimes run through a train of thought with GPT and then you kind of realize, no, I just articulated that poorly. And it's kind of a testament to what a general support team has to deal with because when you explain your problem, it could mean a variety of different ways. And then when you look back at it, human language is so interesting, neat, and kind of weird that you look at it and you're like, oh, I see. I just talk really poorly, and I have this dialect and slang and stuff that all kind of feed into it. So all those are awesome points, and I'm glad that we kind of resonate on a few of those and have similar experiences. For for my last question, I just wanted to see what you had in order to kind of maybe feed our audience and how people can adopt to kind of newer tools to stay in line with what trends we are kind of seeing. This might be a business that needs to do X, Y, or Z. What kind of general business practices do you feel like AI is able to help enhance both the internally and externally? Like, what can people be doing now that you don't really see people doing? And what kind of advice would you give to someone kind of who has all power over all products in order to incorporate AI into their infrastructure? If
Um, those are really complex questions. I don't want to pretend. I don't want to try to answer that one, but I will say
Mhm.
that for the SigmaWire slash Free Switch audience specifically, where I think there's a really interesting and underdeveloped opportunity in general. Every company in voice AI is inching their way towards this. And I say voice AI, even this is the definitions are so fuzzy because that can mean the AI that does text to speech. But in our case, I mean specifically a conversational agent that interfaces over voice. Um,
Mhm.
I think there's a really interesting and underdeveloped opportunity to add a layer of intelligence on top of existing infrastructure. I don't mean this very specifically. If you have a PBX, if you're using Free Switch specifically for contact center, business phone system, PBX use cases, it is trivial now. And this is a bit of a pitch for SignalWire, but I think there is this. You could use other platforms for this. I believe SignalWire specifically has the most sophisticated implementation to facilitate this. Um, is that you can now route calls to an AI IVR, sometimes known as a conversational IVR, that
Mhm.
can automate and deflect routine calls once you program it to do it. And there's a lot of flexibility. They can even transfer calls between different AIs. And then, when necessary, transfer a call back through the PBX to a human. I think that is a really significant use case that has the potential to generate very significant value for teams responsible for innovation, um, AI experimentation, and just adding new and high value features to existing contact center infrastructure.
Mhm.
Because traditional IVR, I mean, and this is to honor people. I don't want to dishonor anybody who has invested a lot of expertise in building really well thought out IVR flows. But there is a limit to how much, no matter how good you make them and how thoughtfully you construct them. It's just the case that in the vast majority of IVRs in the world, humans get really frustrated with the experience when they call it, and by the time they're talking to a human, if they weren't mad before, they're probably pretty frustrated
Oh
now.
yeah.
If they were
Oh yeah.
mad, now it really is a bad experience for the contact center agent on the other end because the person's really frustrated they didn't get what they wanted and they had to click through menus, And especially if it's got a voice activation with pre LLM powered IVR, where it doesn't get the pronunciations right. If you have an accent, forget about it. Even if your accent is perfect and you're clear, because of the issues with the quality of voice on telephony, on traditional phone calls, there's so many ways it goes wrong that just gets people, either calm people into frustrated states or slightly agitated people into furious states. That and that's independent of how much ingenuity you've put into your call tree. AI
Hmm.
IVR designed well, can abstract all of that away, capture people's intent up front, in an open-ended fashion, potentially fulfill their request if they're not just looking to talk to a human, which is what many people call contact centers for, just to talk to somebody. But if they're
Yep.
not, if they actually have a transactional goal, the AI can fulfill, if you design the proper structure, AI can fulfill that completely. Um, and then when necessary, transfer to a human. And then you have all the stuff in place to optimize the customer experience over time. And that gets really, really interesting when you can, as channels and multimodal AI gets more sophisticated, when you can do that over video, when a voice agent can send a text message and the person can respond to that text message. That's, by the way, that's why I got interested and pitched my services to SignalWire, because of these capabilities. So that I think is really interesting and also raises complex questions, because more it's conceivable, not today, but over time, more a larger and larger and larger percentage of all the interactions that customers call into could be handled by increasingly intelligent AIs with increasingly lifelike, emotionally intelligent voice responses. And there are very significant implications for economies, for jobs. The Philippines economy has a large percentage. I don't want to say exactly what, I think above 10% of its GDP potentially is the contact center industry. And that's not just people answering phones, it's all the infrastructure around it as well. But I think there is a very plausible case that what we now call the contact center is going to move over the next few years, and I say few, 2, 5, 10, into the data center, and with a fraction of the humans employed in the process. And that is, the economics of that are incredible. The implications of it are very complex and not subtle. So, like,
Hmm.
not I mean, extremely subtle and not simple. Um, and that is something that simultaneously I find fascinating and extremely challenging for the entire collective, because that is a microcosm, that kind of automation of things that people currently get paid to do, that feed their families, that put food on the table. That there's a reasonable case to be made that that kind of automation is going to wash over every kind of work that involves interfacing with a computer over a window of time that is our lifetimes. And
Hmm.
that's pretty intense.
No, it is, and I like to think of AI as kind of like a horse, where by itself, it could definitely beat me in a fight. But when you learn how to ride it well, I can traverse the entire country. So, kind of
You've been
using
fighting a lot of
these
horses, John.
tools. Oh yeah, I have. I've
Interesting.
fought enough to know that I can't take it on.
Yeah,
Um,
no, they
but
win
it
most of the time.
is definitely very much that kind of horse that helps you do the things that you do a lot better. And I found, at least in my experience, it, I haven't seen massive layouts on, hey, we're going to roll this out. And now, so and so X, Y, and Z isn't going to have a job anymore. I really think that what we're doing is a lot of empowering people to do this in a more efficient way. And a lot of those processes are things that we can automate with computers. Um, I don't want to sit on a phone call and type in what the user is kind of telling me, and put that into a field, when we can just have some AI do that. And to another point that you mentioned on how simple it can just be added on, as a architect, I'm pretty passionate about not breaking anything that, or not fixing anything that isn't broken. I think that there's a large conception of AI needing all this buildup and all of this legwork in order to get up into the cloud. What is the cloud? Sometimes when you're talking about some upper level business people, and it's there's a lot of social restraints, I guess, that we are trying to eliminate. And I think it all starts with quality products that have a specific intent and to do it well. That's kind of how we innovate and how these projects can get more funding, how we get more companies doing that, and how we can better have kind of a symbiotic relationship with AI, and not only in the tools that we use, but also in elevating customer experiences. So to that point, DK, do you have any other topics that you wanted to cover or mention?
I mean, I think, I think you said a lot of it really nicely. The central question for me, and right now I find AI to be a massive multiplier on my output. So I find it extremely useful, and to some cases, frankly, even addicting, because it's like, oh, the things that I've thought through in my head that I want to do, my backlog of tasks, I can get through a lot more of them a lot more quickly, and you get the dopamine from that. But then it's like,
Hmm.
so there is something there. Um, and I also see that there is a way to instrument a lot of what, and sometimes I stop and I do this, instrument a lot of the things that I'm doing manually by going to ChatGPT into a more structured process that will eventually do all of it where someone doesn't need a product marketer to do it for them. And I think, by the way,
Hmm.
like there's fearfulness to that, but there's also really interesting, it depends on your lens, because I think there's, but this is independent of like the contact center use cases, and this is more for the people who in their own productive contexts. Is there the amount of creativity that it can unlock, and the amount of ingenuity and multidisciplinary thinking and synthesis that, you can talk about the overconfidence thing, but the speed if you use it in a certain way, the speed at which you can get from 0 to 1 in a certain skill set, you
Hmm.
can ignore that and just depend on it too much, but you can also learn from it really quickly. And it's an amazing, incredibly patient and persistent tutor. Now the thing is, sometimes it will tell you things that it's as if it were the truth, even though it's not, and that can be misleading. So it's really complex, but ultimately I am simultaneously really, really curious and interested to see what this technology unlocks for businesses, for individuals, for entrepreneurs. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't think it had the potential to be massively disruptive to existing social systems, for better or
Hmm.
for worse.
Definitely. I think our next episode is when I ask you what it means to be the truth, and we can dig deeper into
Great.
cognitivity and what is intelligence, and the theory behind that, because I have a feeling that you have thought about this quite a bit. But DK,
I'm going
thank
to
you so
leave
much for
that
your
one to
time.
better inform people. Sorry.
Exactly. Well, we'll get some philosophers out here.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
DK, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your expertise, and your sharing your experiences that you've had helps us all grow and ride the horse that is AI. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, John. It's great.